Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
Welcome to Stuff I've Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And today we have another interview for you, and it is with two people that we love, who we know, who we got to see recently at a book launch, and we're really, really excited to share this interview with you. So let's get into it. Today, we are so excited to be joined by friends of the show, friends in real life, Holly and Maria, who have done so many amazing things, including writing a book that we're going to talk about. Can you both introduce yourselves to your audience? To your audience, our audience.
To the audience.
You go first, Maria.
My name is Maria Trimarchi, and I met Holly about 20 million years ago when we were writing and editing together. We came back together about 5 years ago to do the podcast Criminalia. And part of that podcast meant that recently we have written a book.
Yeah. So I am Holly Frey. I co-host Criminalia with Maria and also Stuff You Missed in History Class. And I really like drinks. So thus, I pulled the sweetest scam in the world and figured out a way to make drinking part of my job. Because Criminalia has a drink segment and now it has a cocktail book.
Amazing. I didn't think we'd be here, but here we are.
It really is amazing. There are so many recipes in here, and there's both cocktail and mocktail versions. It's just an astounding amount of research.
Right. A lot of cocktails and mocktails, a lot of stories. I know we both did a ton of research for both of those things. It was a long coming.
Yeah, we realized in our third season, which was mocktail forward, because we were talking about imposters, we had a number of people tell us, like, I love the mocktails. I'm actually sober, or I just don't like to drink. Could you do this all the time? And after that, we've had them every season. So the book offered a good opportunity to go back to those earlier seasons and reconfigure those so that they also had a mocktail with them, which was fun.
So just to kind of start at the beginning, how did this podcast, now book, all of the things come about? Because this is an intriguing topic.
This began with Holly, so I'll let her start the story.
Yeah, so Criminalia is part of the Shondaland slate of podcasts, which I was originally executive producing that slate. And our bossy boss, Connell Byrne, had brought me the story of Julia Tofano, which I had already heard about. Mm-hmm. And he said, is this a podcast? And she was a woman poisoner of ancient Rome. And I was like, no, but it's the kernel of one.
Yes.
Her story is not substantial enough, and there's not enough substantive research material to make that into a whole show on its own. But there's something here about this idea of women who are killers and women who are poisoners and doing something true crimey that's not contemporary, that has a little more distance and feels a little less voyeuristic. So that's where it all started. And then I immediately was like, hey, I'm already writing a show, that being History Class. And I was like, I don't think I can also write this show, but I know who can. And Maria is the one and only person I reached out to. She got a flurry of very aggressive texts one day.
I wouldn't call them aggressive. I would call them a flurry. Yes.
It was just very intense. It was like, hey, I'm starting a show and I would like you to write it. And also here's what it's about. And also here's what it would involve. And here's what... So text me back after you get these 37 different things about what I'm thinking.
And imagine me, though. I'm on an airplane when all of these are coming in, and I am deplaning when they are all coming to my phone. And I'm like trying to read all of these things. I'm like, is Holly okay? Like, what is happening?
Is there an emergency? Oh, no.
Right? Holly, dial 911.
Don't do this to me.
Right? What is happening? But I had never, I have never been in the podcast world before. I'd never written anything for podcasts. I'd never co-hosted, hosted any of the above things for a podcast. And I was immediately intrigued by that and the fact that it was historical true crime, that it wasn't going to be, 10 years ago, this thing happened and, the family is still dealing with it and has emotion about it. And people are, we've both talked about how we never wanted a scenario where someone's going to show up at somebody's house. And it's because of that particular crime story. So working in the historical true crime field has been really interesting because you see parts of the world through a very different eye. Like pirate season in particular was like that for me. Like you really, and it's funny. Some seasons will pop up in other seasons too, which I always really enjoy. Like arsenic became a character for us in our first Ladies Who Poison season. But now when it pops up, I always have, and it sounds terrible to say, but I always have kind of a bit of affection for when I see arsenic poison, like murder by arsenic comes up because it was my very first season of Criminalia.
Yeah, you have some good thoughts.
You're like, oh, I know you.
I know you very well.
I was joking the other day because it came up and I was like, hello, arsenic, my old friend.
We did actually just have a script for an episode where arsenic was the method of death. And I want to say that I chose it because of the story, but I know that part of me also chose it because the story included arsenic.
Maria's arsenic bias is really driving the bus.
It is. You just wait and see. Like it's going to come up in everything from now on. I will find it. I'll be like, art heists? Surely there was arsenic here somewhere.
We'll find it.
I will track it down and I will write an episode about it.
That's funny.
I love that. Well, we have talked a lot about women in true crime on this show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really interesting to hear you both being really careful with it and having these different seasons where some seasons are more difficult than others, like maybe take more of a toll. Like the art heist season you talked about was really fun.
Yes,
but then you're working on cold cases, right? Like, and that one's much more difficult. So
cold cases is hard.
Cold cases is hard. Yeah. Partners in Crime turned out to be much harder than I thought it was going to be as well. That was our previous season.
It's probably the most violent season.
Yes.
That's why I think.
I think so too. There was resolution, which is it's always nice to have resolution in these, which we aren't getting in cold cases. You're getting these really, we were just recording one this week where there's a very violent murder that happens. And then ...
Yeah.
But what's interesting about the seasons is they all sort of focus a little bit differently. Like some are really kind of fun, like imposters. There were people who didn't, they just made people up. They weren't pretending to be people who existed most of the time. They're just kind of in it for the rush. But then you have some seasons where you're like, wow, this is really, like, you get to the end and right before the cocktail, you're thinking to yourself, this was a really difficult story to tell. And I need a second to just take a breath. And then we'll talk about cocktails and mocktails to lighten it up a little bit. But we still talk about doing a second season of art heists, which I think would be great because usually nobody dies.
They're pretty fun to talk about.
Yeah. And sometimes you get people where you're like, you tried it that way, like you thought that was going to work. Like, you just put it in your pocket and left. Like, how did that?
Yeah, there are some rough ones. Our witchcraft season was sometimes very difficult because a lot of it is very steeped, obviously, in misogyny and people having a bias to just presume anyone that didn't live the way they did must be inherently evil. And so there was a lot of, I'm using the air quotes, evidence that was really more like just, you're just eccentric, or or you wronged me once, so I'm going to accuse you of this thing and you will die because you pissed me off once,
which came up a lot. And it was a really disturbing season. It was very difficult. We combined it with alchemy. And for the most part, what we, if you just looked at the surface of it, the female witches were all burned alive. And the alchemists just went on to do something else, maybe, or somebody didn't really read their exactly. Maybe nobody read their journal paper that they put out that year. Like it was such a stark difference between the two. And, but the consideration of dark arts was still for both of them, even though they were treated so differently.
Well, I'm interested in how, because the book, you had to really curate a lot of this, like the stories and the cocktails, and it's fantastic. We got to go to a reading that you all did, and there was a cocktail.
It was great that you guys were there.
Great. It was lovely. It was like Halloweenish time, and it was kind of a Halloweenish cocktail. It was so nice.
That was, I think, sort of the unofficial book launch.
Yeah.
It was a nice time. We had a cider drink that we were doing.
Pumpkin apple cocktails.
Yeah, exactly.
Delish.
Which, by the way, I have created one of the cocktails with I don't know why I'm showing off the cup like you can see the ingredients. But yes, I did create one
I like the cup. I'm like,
Thank you. I had to get a fancy cup. But yeah, so I did the Galen's Gulp. I told Holly that because I was like, I have these ingredients.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh no. But for research only.
Research purposes only. Strictly for research purposes only.
And it's quite delicious. But I love that this book happened. How did this book come about? We talked about the podcast. Now tell us about the book, which are all the good cocktails.
The book, similarly, Maria got a text. Because I didn't. It was always a little bit of a finger cross in the back of my head. Like, I hope this turns into a book. But I wasn't sure. We did from the jump get a lot of reach outs from listeners that were like, are you going to put this in some sort of published thing? Or are you going to put this online? So I started to put together a book proposal and was talking to people on the iHeart end of things and saying like, hey, can we maybe run this up the chain and pitch it places? And they were like, yes. And at that point I was like, Maria, guess what?
I should bring you in on this now.
I didn't want to tell you in case it just, sputtered out, but we're working on a book pitch. So now is the time that I need to hand some stuff off to you and have you go over it and put your touch on it so that it, maintains our vibe and whatnot. And we made a bunch of cocktails and took pictures of them and put them in it. And Maria fine-tuned the narratives and we sent it out. And I'm always a little embarrassed. I'm always a little embarrassed to say that it was very desired. And it actually went to auction, which was cool.
It was
where
very
a bunch of publishers had to put in bids, which was really surreal. Right. And we feel very, very lucky.
I feel like, you put a proposal out and you're like, well, maybe someone might be interested. And it was more than one someone. And it was really, it was actually really telling that, hey, maybe we're doing something that is interesting to others, not just to us.
Right. I mean, it's very interesting. It's different. It gives you recipes on top of the fact you get historical lessons and beautiful illustrations. Those pictures of the cocktails are so pretty and all of that. And I know Anney started off the question and I didn't let you finish. So how did you come to the point of like picking and choosing the recipes, picking and choosing the stories? Because you guys have a lot.
I think, well, when I was choosing, I was going through, the book actually encompasses 8 seasons of the podcast. But the episodes are not, it's probably about 50%, would you say, about half and half episodes from this show. And then new episodes in Cocktails and Mocktails are the other 50%. And so going through 8 seasons, that's a lot of seasons to go through. But I went through not with, my first pass wasn't with, these are stories that I really enjoyed telling. It was, I was looking at the pair each time. So I was looking at what the cocktail mocktail was plus what the story was. And did they both seem really solid to me? Did they both seem like they could stand up in a book? And did it also seem like I could take the story and make it, a bit of more of a postcard than an episode, Yeah. But that was where I first started, was just looking at both, not just narratives, because it's a killer cocktails book and the narratives are those cocktails' inspiration. So I wanted to make sure everybody was very friendly hand in hand and could stand on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it becomes a little bit about balance, because I had picked out like, okay, here are my favorite cocktails from any given season, but then are we running a little too heavy on clear liquors?
Right.
Are we balancing out the types of things? Are too many of these floral cocktails? Because I'll admit, like, I love a floral cocktail.
We both do. So we could fall into that real easy.
I also love a desserty cocktail. So we try to not only have those and be repetitive, but also try to make sure that, we have enough ingredient repetition that that it feels like a cohesive season where people can make use of anything special they've had to buy. That was kind of how we balanced that out. And then once we picked new stories, that was always back of mind to me. Okay, what is this chapter now missing in terms of a balance out? What is lacking? What would complement the other things we have so that it does, give some variety, but also make sense together?
I always have a list of episode ideas that don't make it to a particular season. And so that was my first place of going to when I was like, okay, we've got more stories that we've got to find. And there are some people I know I wanted to talk about. And some of them made it and some of them didn't. Some of them just didn't have a strong enough, primary sources or strong enough story. But we did have a few places where we could begin, which was nice.
That I feel so hard. The difficulty of finding like primary sources.
Oh my gosh. Oh my
It's so tricky sometimes.
Yes. When we come across things like, this is the first murder ever recorded with the entire court transcript still available. I'm like, what? Oh my God.
Yes.
Like, this is the only document I need. We're good. Right. Because usually that is so far away from what the reality is. Like,
Absolutely. One of the things we wanted to talk about is you both have been working together for a long time.
Yes.
Or known each other for a long time, I'll say. And Samantha and I also, we struggle with, the sources. We also wrote a book. It was in different circumstances. And we had these concerns. We had these concerns of like, will our friendship withstand this kind of working relationship?
So there was a moment in an elevator in Atlanta, Georgia. I looked at Holly. It was after we recorded the audiobook, and I looked at Holly and I was like, that day was exhausting. And we actually ended up going back to her house and my room, and just both passing out. I mean, this is the kind of thing that really tests your friendship. And I was like, I think we're doing pretty good. And she's like, that's what you think.
I meant that only as sarcasm.
I love that little story. Because I do believe that we did make it through okay. It was a lot of pressure.
I mean, you're still here talking to us, so that's good.
There's a lot of back and forth and a lot of like I was saying, there is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of deadline. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And I've always found that Holly and I have been very collaborative through our whole work experience. So when we met, I was a writer at How Stuff Works and she was my editor. And I remember saying from time to time, like, Holly will edit my articles and I won't necessarily, like she can sound exactly like me, which makes our relationship also that much better too when it comes to writing the book and putting pieces together, or, hey, I noticed this about the cocktail intro, or hey, I noticed this about the intro to X story. And we were really able to just sort of back and forth. I took care of this for you. I noticed this for you. And it was a question that was on my mind before we started too. I mean, this is it's a very intimate thing to get into with another writer.
Yeah. Yeah. Does it sound bad if I say it never even occurred to me?
No, it doesn't sound bad, because I think that we just kind of went,
right. Like
we're just doing this. Like,
we're
this is
very
part of what we do.
good at going back and forth. And really, like, even when we're prepping an episode, right? Maria writes the primary. She hands it off to me. I do an edit pass. I hand it off to her.
Mhm.
She does her last edit. But like any editing I'm doing is either I know something about this topic, we
Right.
should add this in, or just the secondary ear at that point of saying,
Yeah.
you know what, if we only leave it this way, I think a listener might be confused or it won't be complete.
Right.
It's never like,
I'm
it's
gonna add
always
these 2
it's like
pages to it.
improv. It's always a yes and, you know what I mean? It's never like, this sucks, take this out. It's always like,
Right.
how can we just fine tune this? I see what you're doing. You're like 99.9% of the way there, but if we just move this phrase to the back of the sentence, it's going to make it punchier. It's
And
like,
all writers know that like that is just, it's critical. It's lovely to have somebody who can go, you know what? I'm going to take your sentence and flip it and now look at it. And you go, oh, Jesus, I was thinking the same thing the whole time, but I just didn't do it, you know? And
Mhm.
so when we're doing the scripts, it is really helpful to think about things like she'll leave me little comments, and, did he say, was it this or was it this? And I'm like, well, I think it was this, and like you sort of go back and forth a little bit. But it was at the beginning, it was a little bit harder for me because I'd never written anything for audio. And so I was relying on Holly to be like, listen, is this correct? Like, is this the way that I should be, is this a good script sort of template? Not to templatize what the story means, but a way that I should be writing this. And that was very helpful because she has a lot of podcasting experience. And now I'll leave her comments where I'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe that they said blah, 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 blah. Knowing that she's the next edit, but there's one thing actually that is a little bit different in the episodes is from the very beginning, I don't know, and I don't want to know. I've made it very clear. So this is no surprise to anybody, but I'm always as surprised as a listener when it comes to the cocktail and mocktail segment. And I don't know what it's going to be titled. I don't know what the ingredients are going to be. I don't know. And I don't want to. I want it to unfold to me in the same way that it unfolds to the audience. And I know Holly's laughing about this, but when you've written the narrative of it and you know someone very well and she's going to be making the drink that goes with this, I always stop and think to myself, like, this is a really great quote that Holly might find inspirational for her, cocktail name, or maybe the cocktail itself. And whenever I come across like little sort of oddities, I always make sure they get in there because I want her to have as much creativity as she can from that story. But yeah, I know nothing.
About the cocktails. I know nothing. I love this conversation. That's one of the things that Anney and I talk about often is about our relationship and being like, you see so often when people don't know how to work together and they can fake it, but there's still just something, and like
you
when
don't
you're
feel the
having
spark. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then also just the level of support that really, really makes a show or really, really makes a working project so much better. And just out of curiosity, when you guys are working together and collaborating, does it feel like it's growing your friendship or does it feel like you're having to just do work? That's a really
God, I have
odd
to
question.
endure this woman. I'm hanging by a thread.
Like, thank God she lives 3,000 miles away from me.
Every week is a white knuckle affair.
I have to get this drink done or I'm not going to be happy.
It's great. It's so easy and so relaxed.
Yeah.
And
It really is really easy and relaxed. Like, it's the kind of environment Holly and I feel where when we had, I'm going to use one example from our audiobook reading experience again. I had what was turning into kind of a migraine one morning when I woke up at my hotel, and I was like, this day is full of French, which I have a hard time with. And like, I would rather speak, like, seriously, I'm like, I was talking the other day, we had some Welsh names that came up, or town names, I think, that came up in our script. And I was like, Welsh is real hard, but I'd rather do that than French.
no way, man.
Because
French all day, baby.
I feel like the Welsh will forgive me. Whereas like,
That's fair.
I'm using this example as just a way of saying, oh my God, I think my head is going to fall off. And Holly was like, well, we'll just switch this and we'll be fine. And I was like, wow, that was really easy, and it's just very easy. Hey, can we switch a day? Can we do this? What about this person? Like, it's all very accepted and very just part of what the show and book are. Well, more the show now these days.
Yeah. I think part of it really is just there are a few components that I'm sure you two also know that go into like keeping it easy breezy, right? There's a lot of trust, which we started out with on the show because we had worked together before. And I know like Maria doesn't drop the ball. If she does, some really serious is going down.
I'm probably being eaten by my cats at that moment. And so someone should please come help me.
At which point she would have grace from me anyway. And, you know, even when you would think she would have every excuse on earth to drop the ball, she never does. But also like, we both know, okay, I had this thing come up. Can we change this around? Or like
Never
even scheduling this week. It's like we're both pretty unflappable. We both recognize like
things come
none
up.
None of this is brain surgery. We can handle this. We can work around it. Like if we record on a different day, it's fine.
Right. I can't handle it. It has to be always the same. Yeah, no, it's we just roll with a lot of stuff.
Mostly we have 2-hour conversations about our pets, and somewhere in there we've gotten 40 minutes of a show.
And and then we go, oh, should we record? Like I'm like,
I love that. That's understandable, and I approve.
Well, especially this week because Holly has 2 new kitties at home, so it was a lot of conversation about kitties.
It's just like a kitty fever over here.
Ugh, I want to hug a cat.
Which then, of course, my brain is like, can I come up with some sort of kitty season?
No, that's funny.
Cat burglars.
Cat burglars. Hey, you know, and every time I'm going to be like, and then the tabby across the street knew that,
right.
You know, saw the man climb the pole. And
what was the whole narrative with the cat lady conversation? With the fact that when you get like the cat scratches, that actually can cause.
Are you talking about the cat scratch fever is usually a lymphatic infection.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there is a specific parasite that is often in many cat systems. Is it Toxoplasma gondii? Please don't. It's toxoplasmosis, but it's
it's
forgive me because I just got that thing wrong. But that can actually change your behavior if you're exposed to it.
Next episode.
They're like totally in charge of you after.
Yeah, it's not quite the same as like the parasitic infections that like turn the host into a zombie, right?
I mean,
but
zombie,
it's not far.
That we know of.
It's more about, you know, servitude. But that's why, you know, pregnant women are always encouraged not to scoop litter boxes, et cetera, because they're at heightened sensitivity to it. And that is usually where you might be exposed to it.
Anney, cat burglary.
I love all of these.
So when that pops up, the first episode, I'm going to be like, this is from my friend.
I mean, I would rob a bank if my cat told me to. So that seems correct.
That's like I need my treats.
It does, right? My cat is trying to teach me new times of day when she should have treats.
Yeah.
So, this
Real
whole
pushy.
just when I leave is not working. So like
she's like, nah. Or
she's
maybe
like,
you don't leave enough. So she's like,
she's like, are you in the
now?
kitchen? I think I'm going to need a treat. You're in the kitchen.
They're right there. I don't understand the problem.
And they're behind a glass cabinet door. So she's like, look, I can see them. Can't you?
I see it. Pointing at it.
I got to get that parasite in you. Like,
eventually. I love all these conversations, and it's such a great like common ground in this conversation in being able to be friends and actually get along with each other and enjoy each other's company. That's such a different level when it comes to, especially if you're like having deadlines, because I know writing a book, doing the audiobook, we know.
You guys did an audiobook too, right?
Yeah. That was a surprise to us. We didn't realize we had to do one, and then it came up. We were like, "Wait, what?"
Foolishly, we didn't realize we had to do one.
We did.
I don't know why that never occurred to
halfway
us.
through reading it, and they were like, "What's happening?
We're reading our book? This is our book."
Literally.
Like, I never would have written this if I know I had to say it out loud.
Like the way we wrote our book to this, we were like, "Wait."
I had moments like that. I was like, I never would have written it this way if I knew I was going to be reading the audiobook.
Right.
I would have taken all
It looks like
the
textbook
French out of
stuff.
this.
Bring it on, baby. Bring it on. But you keep the Italian because I'll mess it up.
Right. We should have been like, we'll split this up by mostly just by, we did it the way that we do the podcast. So we just kind of, alternating.
Yeah.
But yeah, we absolutely should have been like, and Holly will take all the French and Marie will take all the Italian and we'll split the rest. Everybody gets Welsh.
Yeah. I do that sometimes. I do sometimes we have a feminist around the world type of a segment. And if it's like French, I'm like, I'll let Anney say this. Because she does French better than in German. I'm like, and then even like Mandarin, she does well. I'm like, I'm gonna let her handle this.
You're the languages person of the team.
I love it because you spring it on me. You're just like,
I do. I'm like, hey. So we don't have about last minute. I'm like, there it is. There you go.
Right. I'm not going to read this next sentence. That's you.
Yeah. Essentially,
that's when I put in just for you.
Yeah, just for you, boo. But all of that, with that, how was the process in writing this book as well as doing the audio for you?
I mean, you know what? A lot of it was hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
Understand.
Right? Where it would be like, your deadline is this week. Okay, cool. We're going to bang this out. No problem.
Mm-hmm.
We got it. We have it over to you. And then it would be like, are we getting pages back soon? Because we have another deadline coming up.
Right? Like, and it's soon. Like,
And then there was an interesting thing that happened because initially we were both kind of looking at everything. And we realized we needed to silo up a little bit to keep things moving along, where I kind of focused on the cocktail pieces and she focused on the narrative.
Yeah,
but then
just for sanity at the end.
There were a couple moments where that bit us on the tail a little bit because then our copy editor was like, wait, there's something referenced in the drink that isn't in the narrative. And it was like, SpaghettiOs. So we just had to like go back and make things match up again.
We tried. I think we might still have one or two that actually made it into the book where we were like, I know there's one story title that doesn't make a lot of sense with the story, but what can you do? You need to, we were at the very end of the book process. And I actually remember this particular story. And to fit the copy onto the page, we needed to cut I think I needed to cut maybe 2 lines or something like that. But in cutting them, I removed the reference to the headline and I didn't realize it. And I think both of us at that point, we had been very aware of like cutting X will impact Y. But when you get to the very end, you're like, wow, I'm at the very end. And I just, yeah.
It's got to be done.
It just has to happen. And I think I actually went in thinking that we had one more look-see at the final before we went to read the audiobook. And I was like, is this the final? Like, is this it?
We did too.
We did too. Yeah. They told us we had one more.
I'm curious about the two of you. Did you have the thing happen? Because I know this happened to us, where when you're reading the audiobook, which is essentially you are reading from the locked manuscript, were you like, damn, I wish we could have done this earlier because there's some stuff I would go back and do a switcheroo on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, saying it out loud, I don't like this as much anymore.
Yeah. Well, like I said,
mean, they were minor, but there were a few things that popped up that I'm like, I would have reworded that.
There were minor things, and they were minor so much so that there was one, I remember very clearly, there was one stalker story that needed to end in a question mark, but it ended in a period, and that will always haunt me.
Yes.
We definitely had those moments, mainly because, again, we had not even processed the idea that this was going to be an audio format.
Yeah.
But we would have like this moments of like, this sounds so robotic, because reading it seems like a very matter of fact, like information that you're just trying to get out there so that the rest of the conversation or story makes sense. But when you're reading it out loud, you don't know how to actually relay it in a way that's both interesting and noting that it's needed. So I remember a couple of moments like, this doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Considering that the origin point is a podcast,
yes.
Right?
Then it goes to book, but then when you read the book, it doesn't sound
You're like,
right.
wait a minute, yeah.
Yes. When we were doing it, the person who was like our director, she was like, podcasters are terrible at this. Because she was like, it's just different. It's different having like a conversation with someone that can like move and evolve versus I have to read this off of a page.
Right. Also, we're writing a script versus writing a story. Like it's two different things in our book.
Yeah. And like and you're right. It is the difference between writing the script for your episode and writing a story that's a short story that's going to be, highlighting a drink in a book. It's a different kind of thing. So I'm always reading, and I know Holly is too, when we get our scripts, we're always reading them aloud and in different draft modes, but when you're working with the book, you are, I mean, at least I was reading it aloud, but it's not quite the same as when you get into that room. And our room, when we did our audiobook, was one big recording studio, and we sat in it together, which I generally, and I was just outing myself as kind of gross, but like when we record, I cough a lot when I'm talking for this amount of time. And so it was one of those moments where you were like, I can't even like pick up the pronunciation piece of paper because I will make a noise, and Holly's talking, and I'm not used to that kind of problem. And this was so like, I got to sneeze and I can't. And I got like, it wasn't even just reading. It was just like daily living in my body that was difficult.
Right. Being very silent. Yeah. The director would occasionally come on and be like, there's some weird noise. I can't. And he'd be like,
one time he's like, I think I heard somebody's stomach grumble. I'm like, oh, gee. That's me. Yeah. Didn't want to open my water because it might actually cause noise. Like,
yeah, I had at the time when we did our audiobook, I had a stress-related vocal problem called globus. It was horrible. I still struggle with it, but it just makes you feel like there's something in your throat all the time.
Do you clear your throat a lot?
Well, I don't clear my throat, but it feels like you're swallowing a lot. You
I swallow a lot.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But it's this like speaking noise in this general,
and it's the worst.
Yeah.
It's like the worst thing for the job that we have. I'd be interested if you have thoughts about this. Our book was a tough one to read aloud because it was emotional, and it was like a really rough. I was not anticipating I was going to have to say this, and now I'm doing it. Because you work in true crime, and you've talked about how that's not necessarily something that has super interested you in the past, but like the historical aspect and being careful and all of those aspects. But is it difficult sometimes when you're reading these things or writing these things?
Yes, absolutely. I actually recall there was one story that you were reading, Holly, when we were in the audiobook room, where she just, and I knew that this was a story that got her the first time we read it. And Janet Horn. And I know it's a really difficult one for Holly. And I tried to be like super quiet when she had to read it because I knew she was like getting through it,
Yeah.
Like,
hanging by a thread. Yeah, I mean, it's like it was not originally an episode of ours. It's one that was just for the book. And it's about a woman who was burned as a witch, but she almost 100% just had dementia. And her story just really, I don't know what it is. It really hits me hard, even to the point where when I made the drink for it, and the illustrations are actually, they start with photographs. Like I take photographs of all the drinks, I stage them out with props, and then I put those photographs into Photoshop, and I do tracing around them and cross-hatching and like make them look like, the idea was to borrow from the Jerry Thomas cocktail book from the 1860s. That's all, cross-hatchy pen illustration. And even doing hers, like taking the picture of her drink, I was like kind of a mess. All of the ingredients in it are about, it's called Apology. And all of the ingredients are about forgiveness and making peace and apologizing. And I included calla lilies as part of her photograph because those are also associated with the idea of penitence. And I literally kept getting choked up just taking the damn pictures of the cocktail. And I was like, ooh, this is going to be a mess. And I barely got through that one.
I know. That story ended. The ending image in her story is her being walked to her execution point, and there's a fire going because they're going to burn her. And she just walks over and starts warming herself by the fire. And that's the end of her story. And that, how can it not get you? I mean,
I literally am choked up just talking about this. So
yes, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
I brought up Janet. It's a
I'm
hard
an
one.
easy crier, so it's not that long a walk, but she in particular really hits my heart in a way that none of the others have. I mean, many others have made me cry at various times, but she's just like really hard for me.
Her story is a very, very emotional and difficult one. I find sometimes when I'm doing research for various episodes that there will be things that will come up that will either change my mind about how the script is going to be written, or sometimes change my mind on whether or not that person or persons will even become an episode. There are some things that I kind of hold back on when I'm looking at our season schedule. And well, one, we talked about earlier, we don't do modern true crime. But two, there's a children component to it that I don't feel comfortable talking about. And in general, you won't find children come up in our episodes unless they are not the main character. And that in particular has become a really interesting problem in cold cases season, because a lot of cold cases tend to, I didn't know this before I started my research there, but a lot of the cold cases that are historical cold cases seem to be very heavy on young women in their early 20s and kids. And so there are some things I just find a little bit taboo, a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit, just don't want to go down that path of this particular podcast isn't for that. Those are hard stories. And, I mean, sometimes you just come across some really hard, quotes that, somebody said when they testified, and you're like, oh my gosh, do I include this idiot in the script or do I not?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's actually the story takes a turn where you think to yourself, this is absolutely horrifying. And then you have to decide what to do with that.
Those are the ones where when we do them, the cocktail often tends to be about trying to be an antidote for that situation.
Exactly. And I love that.
On one of our recent seasons, so it's not in the book, one of the women that we talked about in the criminal duos season had a mother who treated her like trash. And even so, when she was eventually incarcerated, she wrote letters to her mom that were so concerned about having hurt her mother and having like embarrassed the family and stuff. And so the drink we ended up making was kind of like you know what, if she had had the life she should have had, because she was a very smart, curious, interesting person who was very, very chic in her mode of dress. And like, if she had had the life she should have had, she would have been amazing. And I was like, what is the drink that she would have had in her cosmopolitan lifestyle that she really, really deserved to live? And that's the drink we ended up making.
And instead, she was married to Clyde Barrow's brother. Got
completely involved in like stuff she had no business being
no
near.
business. And she even said, she wrote later on that her role was really like, I would pay for the lodging and I would cook the food and do the clothing. And she really wasn't. She was part of the gang, but she didn't really. Yeah, she wasn't.
But
really
it was
part
one of those
gang.
cases where he was the first person that ever treated her kindly and with genuine love. And so it was like, well, you're a criminal and you're involved in some shady stuff, but you're kind to me, and that's, I've never had that before, so I'll stick it out. And
hers was really very sad when we got to the her time in prison, because one, she was part of this gang where if you needed to pick one person who was going to go to prison for everything that they were doing, it probably shouldn't have been her. But no. but just her Holly. I mean, when Holly was talking about her letters, it really reminded me that her story is so separate from the story that she actually was living. And sometimes you come up with these dualities or these surprises in your research, and you're like, oh, wow, we should talk about her because she's interesting. And not just because she wears really great pants.
Not just because she dresses like a starlet.
Right? Oh, man. Yeah. 1930s.
I love this because I think it's so important when you're talking about things like this, that it's the compassion and the curiosity is so clear, and just like really wanting to get to know the people that you're talking about. I would love if we could briefly discuss. I think it's interesting that both of you kind of tried new-ish things for this. Because Holly, you had done, like, you were familiar with cocktails, but you actually went to bartending school, right?
I did.
She did.
Yeah.
I did. And
they're
loved
so
it.
creative. I love how much thought you put into, like, what do these ingredients mean and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I realized pretty quickly, like, listen, Holly drinks. I've had a lot of cocktails in my time, right? I'm a pretty adventurous consumer, so I will try a lot of things that I've never had before, and so I knew probably more than the average bear about various cocktails, but I really didn't have the foundational knowledge that was gonna carry me through seasons and seasons. And I didn't even know we would be here at season, 15, talking about new things and being, I don't know how many hundreds of drinks in the mix. But I just realized, like, I am gonna make messes if I don't get my act together and really, really get that, baseline foundational knowledge under my belt, so that I go into my cantina to experiment already having usually a pretty solid idea in mind of what I'm making. And that's because of that education, which was, great. I highly recommend it for anybody. It's a really fun area of learning. And I ended up with some really fun history knowledge from it, because the course that I took also talked about things like, hey, here's why this rum is different from other rums, and it's because there was a slave uprising on the island where they originally processed this, and so you don't have it from molasses runoff anymore. It's from pure cane sugar. And I was like, this is the course for me. This is the correct one.
And like, she'll come back from that, and I'll be like, tell me more. Like, I'll be like, I need to know more about this.
Well,
teach me what you know.
I also
what you
just,
learned.
ended up researching too a lot of cocktail history, right? Like, I often, because we're telling historical stories, it's a good fallback. It's like a really good safety net especially when we're dealing with a story that is sad or upsetting, to be able to be like, okay, but what drinks were popular at this time, and how can we tie that into this story? We just did one like that that we recorded this week, because it was like a little tricky. And I was like, hey, but I know we're talking about a really gruesome murder, but what was going on in cocktails then? And ended up turning up the story of a woman who was one of the few head bartenders at the Savoy Hotel in London in the 1920s. So, like, she has her own interesting story, and we could tie that into the cocktail segment and make it less about almost beheaded. That's not an awesome place to start drinking, but we can talk about what else was going on in this time period.
This is what everyone. So this particular episode that we wrote was very media. Tabloids were real fresh, and so it was real tabloid story forward, and they were really pushing the story. And the way that when Holly came to talk about the cocktail and mocktail, the way that I started thinking about it was, this is what people were drinking when they were gossiping about what was going on with this particular trial. And that was actually kind of a neat little way to think about, like, everybody down in the bar has this particular episode, and they're all talking about what Hearst's newspaper was just printed on its front page.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Holly and Maria. You were such a delight to talk to. We should do a mocktail hour.
We
come back together.
Yes.
Any day.
Sign us up.
But where can the good listeners find you?
In my bar making drinks. It's a safe bet, I gotta tell you. Okay. You can listen.
Also, like,
you can, listen to Criminalia anywhere you listen to your favorite shows. We opted to not do specific Criminalia social media handles, so you could just hashtag Criminalia and we will see it. And then the book Killer Cocktails is available anywhere you would buy books. And
this has been such a delight. Obviously, we could have kept going. But listeners, in the meantime, if you would like to contact us, you can. You can email us at hello@stuffonevertoldyou.com or stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.